I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello, and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host. Today on Just Justice, we have the pleasure of talking with Jeffrey Deskovic, an exoneree, attorney, and advocate for the wrongly convicted. At just 17 years old, Jeffrey was wrongly convicted of raping and strangling a high school classmate based largely on a confession coerced by the police. He spent 16 years in prison before DNA testing finally cleared his name in 2006. Since his release, Jeff has earned multiple degrees, including a law degree, and founded the Deskovic Foundation for Justice. His foundation works to free the wrongly convicted, support exonerees in rebuilding their lives, and fight for systemic reform to prevent future injustices. Jeff, welcome so much to Just Justice.
Thank you very much for having me, Jessica. This will be a fun interview, and I want to note for your listenership that we are familiar with each other, that we, in fact, have participated in several panel discussions on various wrongful conviction-related topics, I believe primarily at Montclair State University.
Yeah, and Jeff, I've always been just a big fan of your work, the way that you've been able to transform what was such a horrific ordeal into something that's so powerful and impactful for so many people. And I really can't wait to talk about it and share your story with our listeners. And so maybe that's the place to start for folks who are new to your story. Can you share about how you came to be wrongly convicted of this terrible crime? Can you just share your story with us?
Of course. So the year is 1990. We're in Peekskill, New York, which is a city within Westchester County, New York. So it's the suburbs. It's about an hour north of Manhattan. Murders were pretty rare at that point. So when this murder happened, it created an atmosphere of fear, rumor, paranoia. Parents were concerned with their own safety as well as the safety of their children. In high school, I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in a lot of organized sports. And this made me seem strange to the kids in the high school. And in the course of the police investigation, they interviewed a lot of students from the school. Some of them told the police that they might want to speak with me because I didn't quite fit in. So that's how I got on the police radar. Additionally, I was a sensitive teenager, and this was my first brush with death. And so I had an emotional reaction. And the police thought that my emotional reaction was disproportionate to what my actual relationship with the victim was, and that therefore it was suspicious. That is to say, really, we didn't really have any relationship. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high-buy basis. In addition to that, the Peekskill police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the actual psychological characteristics of the perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So it was a reinforcing factor. So for the next 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me in which they would start out questioning me like a suspect. And when they would push too hard and I'd become frightened and I'd want to get away from them, Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was developed. Now, prior to being a teenager, the career I wanted to have when I grew up was to be a cop. So that, along with my age being 16, I mean, I was susceptible to statements like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. So let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. In addition to that, I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect. And that also intersected with another police technique, the good cop, bad cop, otherwise known as Mutt and Jeff, in which one officer takes on an aggressive role and the other one pretends to be a friend. So in time, I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test, sometimes called a polygraph. They told me that they had some new information in the police file and they wanted to share that with me, and that would allow me to be even more helpful to them. First, though, I had to take and pass the polygraph. So the next day, rather than reporting to the high school, I went to the police station for a test. Because it was a school day, neither my mother or grandmother, whom I lived, had any idea that anything was wrong. As far as they knew, I was in school, and therefore they did not call around looking for me. So they put me in the car with the officer who was pretending to be my friend. The bad cop and the lieutenant were in a different vehicle, and they drove me 40 minutes away by car across county lines, bringing me from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County. The polygrapher himself was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, Daniel Stevens, but he was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But I figured because I was there to help the police, what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat the entire time I was there. So from there, he put me in a small room. The polygrapher gave me countless cups of coffee. It seems pretty clear in hindsight the purpose of giving me the coffee was to get me nervous. Then he
Mm,
wired me up to the machine and he launched into his third degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And as each hour passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Uh, Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the cop who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and said, "Look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do that any longer. You have to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested." So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed rather large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. There was the push-pull dynamic on one hand, the possibility of harm, and then on the other, this false life preserver that he threw me. So I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based on the information that they had given me that day and in 6 weeks run up to it. By the time everything was said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. I want to add that the interrogation was not videotaped, it was not audio taped. There's no signed confession. It's just the cop's word for it. And later on, when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their story. So that's how I was arrested.
well, that's just, I mean, this is it had all the classic earmarks of a false confession. You had a juvenile, you had the good cop, bad cop, you had um, you were taken away without being advised of a right to an attorney. Your parents weren't notified, your mom wasn't notified, no one was notified, and you were repeatedly questioned, and they didn't accept your answers. And then they told you could go home if you just cooperated after hours and hours and hours of questioning in a really stressful environment. Gosh, I see how that could happen. That's just awful.
Let me explain how I came to be convicted because that's just the arrest. Okay,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
so before the trial, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen found on the victim didn't match me.
Wait. Can you say that? Wait, I just want everyone to hear that. So before the trial, DNA test excluded you. You were not the person that was the source of the semen found in the victim.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So, in order to explain away the DNA, the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to commit perjury. When there's an autopsy done, there's written and audio notes which are taken contemporaneously as findings are made. So, it was only 6 months after doing the autopsy, hundreds of autopsies later, that suddenly this medical examiner said, try to follow this now, this is tricky. He remembered that he forgot to document medical findings, which he claimed showed that the victim had been promiscuous, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue, aha, that is how the DNA doesn't match Deskovic, and yet he was guilty. She was sleeping around. Then he took his lie further, and this is the prosecutor now, and he named another youth by name that he falsely claimed had slept with the victim. But he
Oh my
never said
goodness.
but he never set the proper evidentiary foundation. So he never had a DNA test performed on this other youth. He never called him as a witness to give verbal testimony. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury.
And now this poor the family of the victim is hearing about all these things that didn't happen in a way that's portraying her in a way that was not accurate or fair or representative of who she was.
I agree with that, with the caveat that one of the reasons how he was able to get away with that, though, is that the victim's family was not coming to court. So they had no idea of what was being said about her in the
Oh.
courtroom in the furtherance of
Huh.
trying to convict me. But more importantly, the public defender that I had essentially didn't defend me.
Mhm.
Here's how he failed me. So he rarely met with me. When he did meet with me and I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that that proved that the confession was coerced and false. When it was time to discredit this medical examiner, my lawyer stood up in open court and with a big smile on his face said, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you."
Oh boy.
My lawyer should have never represented me in the first place because of a conflict of interest. This other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of the legal aid society, and specifically by the lawyer that was supposed to be supervising him on my case.
Oh wow.
That conflict prevented the defense from asking him for a DNA sample and prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. There were a couple of other irregularities, briefly. So polygraph test results are not admissible because, I mean, if the jury hears polygraphers say that a suspect failed a polygraph, that's very prejudicial. The
Yep.
polygraph is not scientific. In fact, intelligence officers and people in the military, they're trained to beat the polygraph in the event that they're captured. And it's also often failed by frightened innocent people. So, despite that general rule, that it's not admissible unless both sides agree, the judge allowed the polygraphers to testify anyway. He said, well, this alleged confession happened while you were on the polygraph. And so he was creating this backdoor rule where he allowed this expert to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed while banning my lawyer for asking him questions about the methods he used to arrive at his opinion.
For folks who don't know, polygraphs are notoriously unreliable. As Jeff said, they're just not admitted in court. So there's all this evidence against you at trial, and you wound up getting convicted. And what were you sentenced to?
Yeah, I was sentenced to 15 to life because I had been charged as an adult and tried as an adult, and I was given an adult sentence, and then I was sent to a men's maximum security prison.
Oh gosh. And you wound up spending 16 years in prison, right? How did you stay hopeful during that time?
Well, my belief in God was one thing, and the second thing is that I didn't focus on the 15 to life sentence. I thought I just had to hold on for a year or two to the next appeal was decided, which I was sure I was going to win because I still believed in the system, and I knew I was innocent. So you could say that I lived from appeal to appeal. Another thing is that there was another prisoner there who was innocent also, Frank Sterling, and we used to get together once every 6 weeks, and half the conversation would be trying to keep each other going morale wise. And another part was we would brainstorm about, what was the next letter, the next thing to do. Frank ended up being exonerated through DNA a couple of years after me. So just to be clear, I wasn't naively believing he was innocent just because I happened to be. But also the role of sports, I mean, I think played a role. The mind creates delusions to try to survive really extreme circumstances. So when I would play basketball or chess or ping pong, I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so would
Mm,
the other people. But it really wasn't like kids fooling around on a playground. I mean, I needed to leave the prison for a couple of hours. I used to go to the law library and learn the law, and that gave a sense of empowerment. I would read articles about other people that were exonerated, and I would, use that as inspiration to continue going. I would collect nature scenes sometimes, and from magazines and wherever I could get my hands on it. There was a certain part of the cell you could put the pictures up, and I would look at that. So that was how I got through the experience. I mean, ultimately, I was exonerated. I was proven innocent through further DNA testing through the DNA data bank. They took the DNA that didn't match me, they put it in the data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator whose DNA was there because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed the second victim 3.5 years later. Confronted with that evidence, he admitted he was the person who committed the crime.
Wait, I need to pause again, Jeff, because you just said something so important. And I mean, I think one thing that sometimes gets lost in wrongful conviction stories when we talk about wrongly convicted, obviously there's tremendous harm done to you, the person who was wrongly convicted. But there's also a secondary harm to society, which is that the real perpetrator is allowed to go free and often does go on to commit another crime. So that's a secondary cost or a direct cost of getting it wrong in the first instance. And so what my question, how did the Innocence Project, it was an Innocence Project case, right? How did they come to take your case and whose idea was it to rerun the DNA?
The appeals were exhausted. The only way back into court and that happened 11 years in. The only way back into court is if you could find some previously unknown evidence of innocence that probably would have led to a different outcome. Either that or if there's a change in the law. So I didn't, neither my family nor I had any money to hire an investigator. So I did like a letter writing campaign and looking for anybody that could help, whether directly or indirectly. And one of the letters I wrote was to a book author in care of a publishing company. But the publishing company sent the letter to an investigator rather than to the author. And so investigator Claudia Whitman wrote me back right away. I sent her the paperwork showing the DNA excluded me, and she tried to get people to take my case, and she gave me ideas. And one of her ideas was the winning one. She suggested I write the Innocence Project again, a nonprofit organization in Manhattan that frees wrongfully convicted prisoners across the country in those instances where DNA could demonstrate innocence, in which no prior testing had been conducted. I wrote them originally in 92, 93, but because the DNA testing had happened already and it excluded me, that couldn't be
Mm.
done and presented to the court as something new. Fast forwarding, Ms. Whitman told me that with the data bank being invented, the prior denial was irrelevant.
Again, I don't mean to interrupt, but the Innocence Project takes DNA cases, but if it's already been presented in court, there's no avenue to get back in court because courts want new evidence. And so if something had already been presented, then it's not considered new evidence. So even if it shows you're innocent, it may not be available to you because there was this creation of a new DNA database. There was a new avenue potentially for him to get back to court. And innocence projects don't take all the cases that for people who are claiming innocence. There's just too many people. So for Jeffrey to get on their radar and have them accept their case means there was some strong merit to the argument that he was hoping they'd raise for him. And in fact, you were exonerated.
I was. I want to add that Miss Whitman, she lobbied them to take the case, and she got other respected legal professionals to do the same. Then one of the intake workers, Maggie Taylor, she represented my case because the Innocence Project didn't want to take the case again because of the exclusion. So she presented it a second time, and when they declined to take it a second time, she presented it a third time. This time using the idea of let's use the database,
Mm.
and so this time they took the case. So that was the first key. Second key was that former Westchester County District Attorney Janine Pirro, who was not the DA when I was convicted, but was the DA before my first appeal. So she had fought me in the 7 appeals and blocked me from getting the testing. She left office, and her successor was willing to let me get to further testing. That was the second key. And the third key, of course, was it matched the actual perpetrator. So on September 20th, it's a few days ago, 19 years ago, the conviction was overturned. I was released, and then I went back to court November 6th in 2006, and the charges were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. And the perpetrator was subsequently arrested and convicted of the crime.
Well, happy freedomversary.
Thank you.
That's
Absolutely.
amazing. 19 years. Wow. Um, yeah, that's pretty amazing. And Janine Pirro, huh? She was the one who was back making news then, back making news now. So coming out after 19 years, what did freedom feel like on that first day? And what was sort of the hardest parts of starting over in this free new world?
Well, the first day it felt surreal. I mean, that was actually my first words at the press conference. Is this really happening? But I would say that overall, I mean, I I couldn't relate to the people on the outside. I felt like I was a fish out of water. The world was much different now. The technology was different. So GPS, cell phone, internet hadn't been created. Culture was different. Buildings and cities, structures in the different towns I knew were all different. Um, it was awkward when I'd meet up with my extended family because the overwhelming majority of them had not come to see me, and the ones that did, it was sporadic in between. Then, in addition to that, I was always passed over for gainful employment. I mean, I felt like all the would-be employers, they wanted somebody with experience, and I didn't have the experience. I needed somebody that would be patient and give a little bit of on-the-job training, but I didn't find anybody that was willing to do that. So I was making money doing speaking events, but that's not a consistent form of income. I caught on as a weekly columnist for a newspaper, and I got paid for that. It was only a weekly newspaper, so they only wanted one article a week. So I was largely passed over for gainful employment. So things were very tight. I lacked stability of housing. I bounced from place to place. At one point, a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter.
And Jeff, just to interrupt again, I apologize. I feel like I keep interrupting you, but I want to make sure we're slowing down to think about some of the things you're saying because I think the media always captures that moment, that freedom, that the person has been exonerated, they're innocent, and now they're free after how many years they spent behind bars, and the cameras turn off, right? And there's this real challenge because you've got sometimes a decade or 2 decades, in your case, 16 years, gap on your resume. You went in when you were a teenager, so, you didn't necessarily have any job training or job skills. You have nothing to show for sort of what you can accomplish except for whatever programming may have been available to you in prison. Often it's not available for lifers, right? And so that's really challenging right there. And even if you're in a state where eventually you can get compensation for your wrongful conviction, and not every state allows for it, that takes time. There's a big gap between when you're released and when you might receive compensation. And so what you're describing is unfortunately very typical for exonerees.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that. I think it's a great point. It took me 5 years before I was compensated, and you're released. You're released without anything. That you're not. I feel strongly that they should be given, housing, doctor and dental care, access to public transportation, job training, job placement, mental health professionals. But instead, none of that is provided. I went to see mental health professionals 4 times a week for 6 years just to assist me in the after effects of my experience, but also trying to adjust to new life on the outside. It was also very it was extremely lonely as well. So it was definitely quite a challenge. At the same time, I kind of found myself at the same time while in the middle of all that struggle. And I found myself as an advocate. I mean, as I mentioned, I was speaking, I was writing, I was regularly meeting with elected officials, urging them to pass policy changes aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I was trading privacy for awareness by doing media, television, radio, ultimately new media interviews. So I did that for 5 years. I also got a scholarship from Mercer University to finish the bachelor's degree. So I'd gotten a GED and associates while I was in prison, and I had completed a year towards the bachelor's before the funding was cut for a college education for prisoners. So I just had a year left to do as far as to get the bachelor's. So I got the scholarship for Mercy College to do that. They allowed me to live on campus, which is how I avoided the homeless shelter. I didn't get into law school, so I went to grad school instead. I got a master's degree. My thesis was written on wrongful conviction, cause, and reforms. I thought that the additional credential would make me a more effective advocate. I did get compensated finally, and I used some of the money to start the nonprofit, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which since opening our doors in 2011, we've been able to help free 15 people. Six of those exonerations, and then we helped to pass 9 laws. And at some point after that, I got tired of sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients, make some of the arguments. Hence, the second foray into trying to get into law school. I made it in this time, and I became an attorney.
Yeah, so you are an attorney and you used, as you said, some of the monies that you were finally able to receive for your wrongful conviction to start this amazing foundation, the Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And you've done some amazing things and you mentioned them quickly, but I thought maybe we can go back over that. So you've personally helped 6 other innocent people be exonerated. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that is right. Yes.
I mean, that's right there. It's sort of an extraordinary number, and it's been in a relatively short period of time. Takes a really long time to get people's innocence revealed and have a court accept it. It's a lot of back and forth and a lot of effort. So that's tremendous. And you said you've helped 15 other people or 15 people total. What about those other folks who were not exonerated? What did you do for them?
Somebody goes to the parole board if they don't admit guilt and take responsibility, but instead assert their innocence. The parole board usually turns them down. So we've sent the Deskovic Foundation has sent letters to the parole board outlining the primary and secondary reasons why we believe somebody's innocent, and we urge the parole board to just evaluate the rest of their application without holding their innocence assertion against them. Go ahead. We're 5 for 9 on that. So the parole board has released, 5 people that they likely would not have, but for our letters. So that's 5 of the people. Another person, we were reinvestigating their case in collaboration with a conviction review unit of a district attorney's office. But in the interim, they were determined to be terminally ill by the prison
Mm,
doctors. And so
mm.
we used the fact that we were reinvestigating their case with the DA's office as a reason why that client should be granted compassionate release. And so that worked. And another person who was freed on the eve of a hearing in court to consider new evidence. The Attorney General's office offered offered him said, "Look, you can keep fighting. Maybe you'll win. Maybe you won't. But if you'd like, you could end the case now and go home in 2 days if you prefer." That case with Lorenzo Johnson, that was a six-way collaboration because he was a New York resident who was wrongfully imprisoned in Pennsylvania. So we urged him not to take the deal, and the other entities in the collaboration all urged him to take the deal. And he wound up taking the deal, unfortunately. But we did help somebody regain their freedom. It wasn't an exoneration, but it is an accomplishment that we had something to do with him regaining his freedom. So we we
Yeah.
we, we reference and count everything. We're just super accurate not to refer to 15 cases as exonerations. We make the distinction.
Yeah, and I mean, just to go back to the parole board for 1 minute, this
Yeah.
notion that the parole board is supposed to look at somebody's record and their history, but they often sort of get really hyper focused on whether or not the person expresses remorse for their actions. And it's an interesting thing. We could have a whole nother podcast, and I have spoken to folks about whether remorse is even sort of a valid or reliable indicator of future recidivism, whether you're going to commit another crime. But the truth is, for innocent people, it's really a trap because if they express remorse for something they didn't do, that expression can be used against them if they're trying to get exonerated. And yet, if they don't express remorse, that is often a factor that the parole board will hold against them. And so, having an outside entity like your organization come in and say, hey, this person is innocent and here's why, please don't consider the lack of remorse against them, can be really powerful. So, it sounds like you are advocating on all sides for really important ways to get people out, right? There's not just one way to do this.
I want to quickly add that, when I went to the parole board, I asserted my innocence, and, rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, so considering that the parole board acknowledged I had an excellent educational record, a good disciplinary record, and letters of support, it's kind of hard to infer that I wasn't denied parole based on my innocence assertion. So part of the reason why
Yeah.
we do that.
Yeah, and it can be really powerful. It really can be. So good for you for being creative about how you can help folks who are on the inside, who have really strong claims of innocence. And it's not a small number. I mean, it's bigger than I think we think.
Right. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Um, and now, you have sort of described some of your challenges when you got out about not having funding for basic things or mental health care or healthcare. What do you think real support for exonerees should look like? Like what would really enable people who were wrongly convicted to get a meaningful second chance the second they sort of set foot out of the prison gates?
I think providing housing, right away housing, cost of living expenses, mental health services, doctor and dental care, access to public transportation, classes on technology, job training and job placement. So there are 11 states that currently don't compensate people, including Pennsylvania. But I think that aside from just the compensation, I mean, the reentry should start right away as something separate and apart from any compensation.
Yeah, it's interesting too. So I don't want to overstate the quality of this, but if you are actually guilty and you are released on parole, most states provide some of those services that you described through the parole mechanisms. Again, some of it is really lousy and not quality and not available in the way that it should be. But there is some access to services. Whereas if you're innocent and you are exonerated, you're not on parole, which is correct. You shouldn't be under state supervision, and yet that also excludes you from some of those reentry services that you detailed. So it's this darned if you do, darned if you don't situation, really.
Yeah, it is, and it is a great point that you're making because it is counterintuitive. It's not what people think. Just like I don't think that people realize that it's a long, protracted process to get financially compensated. They think that it's instantaneous. You know, and it's not.
No, and I mean, even getting your record expunged is so like it's all so difficult. It's not like when you're innocent and you're found to be innocent, you're exonerated from this wrongful conviction. It's not like somebody calls the court system and the folks who manage the criminal records and the folks who provide compensation. It's not like anyone says, okay, let's get this all going today. It can take years and a sophisticated advocacy effort.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to last point on this I'd like to make is that even in the process of getting compensated, I mean, you would think, well, if the criminal court has recognized that you're innocent and that's why you've been released, that a person be seeking compensation shouldn't have to prove their innocence all over again, but you do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wild system and really not set up to make it easy. The system is pretty good at getting convictions, but not so good at admitting when it's wrong and making things right, for sure. Um, just one of the things that I have taken away from you and watching you and your journey is that, not only did you sort of stay positive while you were in prison, and not only have you turned this terrible thing that happened to you into something so positive, but you've really devoted your work to helping others. And I'm just wondering, you were stuck. You were like in a really hopeless place and you managed to turn it around. And I'm just wondering, do you have advice for people who are listening who may feel stuck or hopeless? Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I've thought about my life journey many times, and I've put together my own little formula for overcoming adversity. Um, I would say have a goal, have a realistic plan. Right, you should be able to look at the plan two or three different ways, and say, "Yeah, I could see how that might work." Because who wants to carry out a plan that you don't think can work?
Mm,
Next thing is, be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. The plan is just how to get there. The next thing is no excuses. There might be reasons why something is difficult, but not no reason why it can't be accomplished. Don't be afraid of hard work. So I'm not really a pie in the sky type person that I think everything's going to fall in your lap and turn out okay just because that's the way it should be. I instead think you have to work really, really hard to put yourself in a position for a miracle to happen. And when you can't go on anymore, just know that you might be on the verge of a breakthrough. So when I've reached that point, then even though I feel like I can't go on anymore, I do it anyway just to see what happens on the other side. And then when you cross the bridge, you gotta reach back and help people in that same position you were in. And if you can
mm,
do that, then it's going to be healing. It's going to be cathartic. It's going to be meaningful. It's going to make your suffering count for something. During my 19 years of freedom, I've seen people from many walks of life that have reached back for people in the same position, whether it's doing wrongful conviction work like me. I've seen people who used to be homeless and now they're working as advocates for homeless population. I've seen women that used to be domestic abuse survivors helping women that are currently in that situation. I've seen formerly incarcerated people who are working with at-risk populations. I've had other people that have emailed me and said, when I learned of you, I thought I had it bad, and when I heard about your story and what you've experienced and what you overcome, it enabled me to put my issues into another perspective, and I realized that they're a lot more manageable than what I what I was looking at before. So I think that those things can be meaningful to the audience who may be struggling with one difficulty or another.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, it's true. You're a living example. You're a living inspiration of sort of moving forward and through things and accomplishing so much and impacting so many people. Now, Jeff, looking ahead for you, what's on the horizon for the Deskovic Foundation? What's on the horizon for you? What are you hoping to see happen in the upcoming short-term future?
So on the short term, we're currently waiting decisions in 7 cases, either from courts or from conviction review units in the district attorney's office. So in the short term, we're hoping to exonerate more people. We are moving ahead with policy changes. So we're trying to pass compensation in Pennsylvania. In New York, there's 3 different bills which would address various would pay would there's 3 bills that would address coerced false confessions in New York, so we're working on that. We're trying to raise more money. We would really like to be able to work on freeing more people at once, and so we need to try to raise money to have additional attorneys, paralegals, other essential personnel. So we would like to be able to expand our capabilities that way. That's in the short term. There is a full feature documentary out about me called 16 Years. It's an hour and a half from Gia Works. So she's currently looking for a distribution outlet. She had the documentary short about me out, Conviction, which is available on Amazon Prime. But I'm hoping that she can find a distribution deal to get the documentary out there fully now. And at some point, I'm hoping to get a literary agent. I'd love to have a book out. I'd like to have a movie done, and I'm looking to add people to the board. I'd love at some point to find a celebrity spokesperson to help raise our profile. Ultimately, thinking more long term, I would love to be able to have a chapter of the Deskovic Foundation in each state and ultimately in each country. We do I do look at wrongful conviction as a worldwide issue in countries where we don't hear about wrongful convictions. It's not that the court system is getting it right all the time. It's that nobody's being exonerated. We do have one international case we just filed as co-counsel in Argentina. Alan Schlenker. We partnered with a local attorney there, so a little bit of work on an international footprint. But we would like to ultimately have something everywhere. I mean, the idea is to just have a never-ending legacy that, of freeing people and trying to make the system more accurate.
Well, I love that. And we will absolutely link to everything you just mentioned in the show notes. So, folks who are interested in donating or learning more or watching the short documentary while the longer documentary continues to find its home, I will make sure to post that. And thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on the show. It was so great to see you and so great to talk with you.
Thanks for having me on. If people like what they've heard, I do want to point out that they can follow us on social media. On Instagram, it's Deskovic Foundation. We're on Facebook as well. The YouTube channel, Deskovic Foundation, has a ton of other interviews, whether media, new media, events, sometimes legislative hearings where I've given testimonies. They can follow us. They can follow us that way. There is our crowdfunding site on the website Patreon. I mean, what if 25,000 people were willing to donate $3 to $5 on a recurring monthly basis? That would give us close to $1 million. And again, we could hire additional lawyers, paralegals, investigators, other essential personnel, and work on, freeing more people. So, hoping that helps inspire that. And thanks for sharing your platform with me this morning.
It was great to have you. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Just Justice. If you like what you heard, please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and tell a friend. To share an idea for the show or to stay in touch, head to jessicahenryjustice.com or find me on the socials at Jessica Henry Justice. See you next time.